You spend 12 to 16 years of your early life working toward this exact moment. You put on the cap and gown, you take the photos, and you're told that you are finally ready. You're at the peak of your potential, fully prepared to take on the real world. And then, the following Tuesday hits. Suddenly, you're sitting in a crowded room or staring at a glowing screen, trying to decode W-4s, health insurance deductibles, and student loan interest rates. Nobody ever walked you through any of this. You spent months memorizing the quadratic formula and the anatomy of a plant cell. Yet, when it comes to a standard tax return or a credit application, your mind is totally blank. Because you don't know the rules, you are immediately vulnerable. You enter the workforce blind to how credit scores dictate where you can live, how compound interest works against you, and how inflation quietly erodes your starting salary. We have built a system of compulsory schooling that successfully produces citizens who are highly educated in academic theory, yet largely ignorant of how money actually moves in the modern world. It's tempting to look at this gap and brush it off as bureaucratic incompetence. We like to think the education system is just slow-moving, bogged down by red tape, and hasn't gotten around to updating the curriculum yet. But the historical baseline of standardized education suggests something else. The classroom model we use today was engineered during the industrial era. It was strictly designed to produce compliant workers who could follow instructions, show up on time, and sit in neat rows. If the economy has completely modernized over the last century, why hasn't the curriculum updated to teach independent wealth generation? We have to ask who benefits when the majority of the population doesn't understand money. This gap raises a difficult question. Is this educational silence an oversight, or is it a deliberate piece of a much larger economic puzzle? By the mid-20th century, the U.S. economy shifted gears. Instead of relying mostly on industrial output, it became highly dependent on relentless consumer spending and retail sales. To keep that massive engine running, people needed to buy more things than they could afford with cash. The financial sector responded by inventing ways for the average person to spend money they didn't actually have, shifting the culture from saving to borrowing. This chart shows the growth of total U.S. consumer debt over the last 50 years. Notice this aggressive upward curve. This is the rise of revolving consumer debt, a specific financial product where your balance carries over month to month, meticulously designed by institutions to generate profit. Let's zoom in on how this works for a single credit card balance. The bank gives you a minimum monthly payment option. That minimum is mathematically calibrated to barely touch the principal. The bulk of your payment goes toward interest, creating a continuous loop of profit for the lender, while your balance barely moves. Now, imagine if every high school graduate fully understood how compound interest works. If everyone suddenly paid off their full balances at the end of every month, the primary profit center for major credit institutions would immediately collapse. Major financial institutions have built an entire business model on the extraction of wealth from the uninformed. This dynamic doesn't just serve the banks collecting the interest, it also serves the corporations signing the paychecks. When you are living paycheck to paycheck, carrying a load of consumer debt, your relationship with your employer changes. You are no longer engaging in a fair exchange of labor for value, you are operating from a state of dependency. This is the same dynamic used in early industrial labor models. The tools look cleaner today, but the underlying requirement is identical. The economy needs a massive, predictable workforce that has to show up, punch the clock, and follow instructions without question. The debt provides the leverage. A worker terrified of missing their next credit card payment or defaulting on their car loan cannot afford to strike. They cannot afford to quit a toxic job, and they certainly cannot afford to take the risk of starting their own business. The systemic trap of poverty serves a dual purpose. It feeds the financial industry a steady diet of interest payments, and it hands the labor market a workforce that is too financially trapped to demand better terms. We are told early on that the safe route is to go to school, get a stable job, and put whatever is left over into a standard savings account. But look at the math, and that exact formula becomes a blueprint for remaining economically vulnerable. If you are waiting for the government or the public school system to overhaul the curriculum and suddenly start teaching wealth generation, you will be waiting forever. A system built on the necessity of cheap labor and consumer borrowing is never going to freely distribute the tools required to dismantle itself. Financial literacy represents a specific type of leverage, the ability to understand assets and capital well enough to buy your own time back from the market. Real wealth-building knowledge is out there, but it has to be actively hunted down. You have to seek it out, read the boring documents, and teach yourself the rules of the game outside the four walls of a traditional classroom. Self-taught financial education serves as a potent act of rebellion against a system that relies on your ignorance to keep you poor.